Most people wait for motivation. I never did. Genius? It's persistence in disguise. I wasn't smarter than others. I just kept showing up. When it rained, I showed up. When it failed, I showed up. When it hurt, when it bored, when it broke. Me, I showed up. And over time, the world mistook that discipline for brilliance. You don't need talent. You need resolve. Decide today. Your dreams deserve your presence. No more waiting. No more skipping steps. One day at a time until the work is done. Subscribe to our channel if you're ready to master your mind and tell us, where are you watching from? Show up before you're ready. Let me tell you about my first laboratory. It wasn't a laboratory at all, just a baggage car on the Grand Trunk Railroad. I was 16, selling newspapers and candy, experimenting with chemicals in between stops. No credentials, no formal education, just burning curiosity and raw determination. They told me to wait. Wait until I had proper training. Wait until I had the right equipment. Wait until someone gave me permission. But here's what I knew then and what I know now with absolute certainty. Waiting is a luxury for those who believe time is infinite. You see, I never waited to feel ready. When I started working with telegraphs, I didn't understand half of what I was doing. But I showed up. Every day, I showed up. When I began experimenting with sound recording, people said it was impossible. They were experts. They had degrees. They had experience. What did I have? Just the audacity to begin before I was qualified. The greatest lie you've been told is that you need to be ready to start. Ready is a myth. Ready is an excuse. Ready is what people use to justify their inaction. You want to know what ready looks like? It looks like showing up when you're scared. It looks like starting before you have all the answers. I'm going to tell you something that might shock you. Of my 1,083 patents, I wasn't truly ready for any of them. Each one was an experiment. Each one was a shot in the dark. But I showed up. I started. I moved forward with imperfect knowledge and incomplete resources. Think about what you're waiting for right now. More education, more money, more confidence. Let me be clear. These things don't come to those who wait. They come to those who work. They come to those who start before they feel prepared. The electric light didn't come from waiting. It came from thousands of attempts, most of them failures. All of them started before I felt ready. The phonograph wasn't born from preparation. It was born from action, from doing, from starting. Before I had all the pieces figured out, let me tell you about the day I first conceived of recording sound. Most would have waited, studied the theory, consulted experts. Instead, I went straight to my workshop. I grabbed what I had, tinfoil, a cylinder, a hand crank. Was it perfect? Far from it. But that crude attempt, that willingness to start before I was ready, led to one of the most important inventions in human history. You see, mastery isn't about starting when you're ready. It's about becoming ready by starting. Every failed experiment taught me more than any book could. Every botched attempt gave me insights that no mentor could provide. The very act of beginning, of fumbling through those first awkward steps, that's where the real education happens. Here's your challenge. Identify one thing you've been waiting to start, one dream you've been putting off until you're ready. Now, I want you to start it within the next 24 hours, not when you feel confident, not when you have everything figured out. Tomorrow, start messy, start amateur, start afraid, but start. Because here's the truth that took me 84 years to fully understand. Readiness is not a prerequisite for success. It's a product of action. The people who change the world aren't the ones who wait until they're ready. They're the ones who start before they feel prepared and let preparation catch up with their momentum. Show up before you're ready. Start before you're qualified. Build before you're an expert. The world doesn't reward the prepared nearly as much as it rewards the brave. And remember this, every moment you spend waiting for readiness is a moment someone else spends building their legacy. Your time is now. Your laboratory is whatever space you have. Your credentials are your willingness to begin. Most people will tell you to wait until everything is perfect. I'm telling you the opposite. Start now. Start messy. Start afraid. But whatever you do, start. Because the only thing worse than failing is never having tried at all. Now, what will you start today? The habit that builds everything else. People often ask me about my secret to success. They want to know what extraordinary insight or particular talent led to my inventions. The answer disappoints them every time. I simply showed up at my laboratory at 7 a.m. 6 days a week for over 5 decades. That's it. That's the system that built everything else. No lightning bolts of genius. No dramatic eureka moments. Just the quiet power of showing up at the same time, in the same place, day after day after day. Let me tell you about my workspace in Menlo Park. Every morning, as the sun barely crept over the horizon, I would walk through those doors. The smell of oil and metal, the familiar creak of the floorboards, these became as natural to me as breathing. Some days I felt inspired, most days I didn't. But I showed up regardless because I understood something fundamental about human nature. Our minds and bodies crave routine. You see, discipline isn't about willpower, it's about systems. When you show up at the same time every day, something magical happens. Your mind begins to anticipate the work. Your body aligns with the rhythm. Even on days when motivation is low, the habit carries you forward. I remember one particular morning in 1879. I had been working on the electric light for months with nothing but failures to show for it. Every fiber of my being wanted to stay in bed, but the habit was stronger than the doubt. I showed up just like any other day, and that morning, that ordinary, unremarkable morning, we made the breakthrough that would eventually light up the world. Here's what most people don't understand about habits. They're not just about getting things done. They're about who you become in the process. When you show up every day at the same time, you're not just building a schedule, you're building an identity. You're becoming the kind of person who follows through, who persists, who shows up when others would quit. Let me give you a practical framework for building this fundamental habit. First, choose your time. Make it non-negotiable. For me, it was 7 a.m. For you, it might be 5 a.m. or 9 p.m. The specific hour doesn't matter. What matters is that it's consistent. Your mind needs to know that this time is sacred. Second, create your space. It doesn't need to be elaborate. My first laboratory was a train car, remember? What matters is that it's dedicated to your work. Your brain needs physical cues that signal it's time to create. Third, and this is crucial, remove all friction between you and showing up. Lay out your tools the night before. Clear your path. Make it easier to start than to skip. I kept my laboratory meticulously organized not because I'm naturally tidy, but because I knew that chaos creates resistance. Fourth, track your consistency. I kept detailed logs of my work hours, not for vanity, but for accountability. When you can see your streak of showing up, you become invested in maintaining it. The record becomes a source of pride and motivation. But here's where most people go wrong. They try to change everything at once. They attempt to revolutionize their entire schedule, their habits, their life in one sweeping movement. That's not how lasting change works. Start with this one fundamental habit, showing up at the same time, every day, no matter what. I've seen countless brilliant minds fail, not because they lacked talent, but because they lacked consistency. They worked in bursts of inspiration, waiting for motivation to strike. But motivation is fickle. Routine is reliable. The most modest talent applied consistently will outperform scattered genius every time. Think about it. If you show up for just 2 hours every day, that's 730 hours a year. That's enough time to master almost any skill, to build almost any project, to transform almost any area of your life. But only if those hours are consistent, only if they're protected by the power of habit. Remember this, the world is full of people waiting to feel motivated. Be the person who shows up regardless. Because here's the truth about success. It's not about the days when you feel like working. It's about the days when you don't feel like it at all, and you show up anyway. Your life will organize itself around this fundamental habit. Your energy will align with it. Your results will multiply through it. But first, you must commit to it. Not for a week, not for a month, but as a fundamental principle of your existence. What time will you show up tomorrow? Choose now. Commit now. And then keep that appointment with yourself as if your future depends on it, because it does. Failure isn't final. It's data. Let me tell you about the 9,000 failures that preceded the successful light bulb. Yes, you heard that right. 9,000 attempts. Most people know about the success, but they don't understand the magnitude of the failures that came before it. Each one of those failures taught me something vital. Each dead end illuminated a new path forward. You see, I never saw these attempts as failures. I saw them as experiments. Each one eliminated one more way that wouldn't work, bringing me one step closer to the way that would. This isn't just positive thinking. It's practical science. Every failed experiment is a data point. Every setback is a lesson. Every mistake is a message. Let me share something I've never told anyone about the day we finally got the light bulb to work. It wasn't actually the breakthrough everyone thinks it was. The real breakthrough had happened 3 weeks earlier, when a failed filament showed us exactly why all our previous attempts had fallen short. That failure was worth more than 1,000 successes because it gave us the map we needed. Here's what most people get wrong about failure. They treat it as an end point. They see it as a signal to stop, to give up, to try something else. But in my laboratory, failure was always a beginning. It was the start of a new understanding, the foundation of a better attempt. I remember one particular day when we'd been working on the phonograph. We'd tried everything we could think of, different materials, different pressures, different speeds. Nothing worked. My assistants were defeated, but I pulled out my notebook and said, "Gentlemen, we now know 47 things that don't work. We're 47 steps closer to finding what does." You need to understand something fundamental about innovation, about progress, about life itself. Failure is not your enemy. Confusion is not your enemy. Uncertainty is not your enemy. These are your teachers, your guides, your stepping stones to mastery. Let me give you a system for turning failure into data. First, document everything. I kept detailed notebooks of every experiment, every attempt, every failure. Not just what didn't work, but why it didn't work. The why is where the gold lies. When you track your failures systematically, patterns emerge. Solutions reveal themselves. Second, analyze without emotion. When an experiment fails, your first reaction might be disappointment or frustration. Push past that. Look at the failure with cold clinical curiosity. What exactly happened? What variables were in play? What assumptions did you make? Third, extract the lesson immediately. Don't wait. The moment of failure is when the lesson is freshest, clearest, most valuable. I made my assistant stop and analyze each failure before moving on to the next attempt. This isn't just about learning. It's about building resilience through understanding. Fourth, and this is crucial, share your failures. In my laboratory, we discussed our failures openly, eagerly. Each failed attempt became a teaching moment for the entire team. Your failures aren't just valuable to you, they're valuable to everyone working toward similar goals. But here's where most people falter. They try to avoid failure altogether. They play it safe. They stick to what they know will work, and to do more. Doing so, they condemn themselves to mediocrity. Because here's the truth. The only way to avoid failure is to avoid trying anything new. And the moment you stop trying new things, you stop growing. I've seen brilliant minds paralyzed by the fear of failure. They have revolutionary ideas, tremendous potential, but they're so afraid of getting it wrong that they never really try. They tinker at the edges, never venturing into unknown territory where the real breakthroughs happen. Think about what you're working on right now. What if you treated every setback not as a failure, but as an experiment? What if you approached each mistake not with dread, but with curiosity? What if you saw your failures not as evidence of your limitations, but as data points guiding you toward success? Remember this: the path to any significant achievement is paved with failures. The difference between those who achieve their goals and those who don't isn't the number of failures they experience. It's how they interpret and use those failures. Your next failure isn't an ending. It's not even a setback. It's simply data waiting to be analyzed, understood, and applied. So, fail fast, fail often, and most importantly, fail forward. Because in the laboratory of life, failure isn't final. It's just feedback guiding you toward your next breakthrough. What failure will you transform into data today? Outwork your excuses. Let me tell you about the night I lost my entire laboratory to fire. December 9th, 1914. I was 67 years old, 10 years of work, gone in hours. Countless experiments, prototypes, and records all reduced to ashes. When my son Charles found me watching the blaze, he feared I'd be devastated. Instead, I told him, "Go get your mother and all her friends. They'll never see a fire like this." Again, you see, by sunrise the next day, I was already planning the rebuild. While the embers were still warm, I told my employees, "We're rebuilding tomorrow." They thought I was in shock, but I understood something they didn't. Excuses, no. Matter how valid, steal your future one day at a time. I had every reason to quit that day. I had every justification to retire, to say I'd done enough, to let that fire be the end of my story. But here's what I knew then, and what I know now with even more certainty. The most dangerous excuses are the ones that sound reasonable. I'm too old. I've lost too much. It's too hard. The timing isn't right. These aren't just thoughts. They're thieves. They steal your potential one rationalization at a time. And the more legitimate they sound, the more dangerous they are. Let me share something about my deafness. When I lost most of my hearing as a young man, people said it would limit my work with sound and acoustics. They gave me a perfectly valid excuse to avoid certain fields of research. Instead, I found that my deafness helped me concentrate more deeply on my experiments. What could have been an excuse became an advantage, but only because I refused to accept it as a limitation. Here's what most people don't understand about excuses. They don't just prevent action. They prevent possibility. The moment you accept an excuse, you close the door on potential breakthroughs. Every time you rationalize inaction, you strengthen the habit of surrender. In my laboratory, I banned the phrase, "It can't be done." Not because everything is possible, but because that phrase too often precedes genuine possibility. I've seen brilliant minds talk themselves out of breakthrough ideas because they could list all the reasons why something wouldn't work. Let me give you a practical system for outworking your excuses. First, write them down. All of them. Every reason why you can't do something. Be honest. Be thorough. Get every excuse out of your head and onto paper. This isn't just cathartic. It's strategic. You can't fight what you can't see. Second, challenge each one methodically. Ask yourself, is this a genuine limitation? Or is it a comfortable rationalization? Most of what we call limitations are really just preferences in disguise. We prefer comfort over growth, certainty over possibility. Third, and this is crucial, turn each excuse into an experiment. When my team said something couldn't be done, I turned it into a hypothesis to test. It's impossible became, let's see what happens when we try. This shift changes everything. It moves you from passive acceptance to active investigation. Fourth, create systems that make your excuses irrelevant. Too tired to work? Create a system that gets you to your workspace before your brain can object. Not enough time? Build a schedule that protects your priority hours before excuses can steal them. But here's where most people go wrong. They try to fight their excuses with motivation. They try to overcome inertia with inspiration. That's not how sustained achievement works. You don't outthink excuses, you outwork them. I remember one of my assistants telling me he couldn't solve a particular problem because he lacked formal education in that field. I asked him to try 100 different approaches before using that excuse. Again, by the 20th attempt, he'd forgotten about his limitation and was fully engaged in the process of discovery. Think about your current challenges. What excuses have you accepted as facts? What limitations have you embraced as permanent? Now imagine those same challenges with your excuses removed. What becomes possible? Remember this: every significant achievement in human history was created by someone who had a perfectly valid excuse to quit. The difference between success and failure often isn't talent or luck or even opportunity. It's the willingness to keep working when you have every reason to stop. Your excuses might be valid, they might be reasonable, they might even be true. But they're still just stories you tell yourself. And you can choose to tell different stories. You can choose to focus on what's possible rather than what's comfortable. Because here's the truth about greatness. It's not achieved by people who never had excuses. It's achieved by people who refuse to use them. So what excuse will you outwork today? When you're tired, show up tired. Let me tell you about the time we worked for 60 hours straight on the phonograph. My assistants were exhausted. Their hands were shaking. Their eyes were red. But we were close to a breakthrough. I could feel it. When one of them suggested we rest, I simply said, "Tired is a choice. Results are waiting on the other side of exhaustion." Now, I'm not advocating for you to work until you collapse. What I am telling you is this: your fatigue is not a stop sign. It's a test of your commitment, a test of your resolve, and most importantly, it's a test that most people fail not because they can't continue, but because they believe they can't. You see, I discovered something crucial during those long nights in my laboratory. There's a difference between real exhaustion and the desire for comfort. Most people quit when they're uncomfortable, long before they reach their actual limits. They mistake temporary fatigue for permanent limitation. Let me share something about those famous 72-hour work sessions people like to talk about. Yes, they happened, but here's what most people don't understand. It wasn't about proving how long we could stay awake. It was about proving that progress doesn't require perfect conditions. You can be tired, you can be frustrated, you can be doubting everything, but you can still move forward. Here's what most people get wrong about persistence. They wait to feel energized. They wait to feel motivated. They wait to feel ready. But here's the truth I learned through decades of invention. The biggest breakthroughs often come when you're tired, when you're frustrated, when every fiber of your being wants to quit. I remember one particular night working on the electric light. We'd been at it for nearly 20 hours. Everyone was exhausted. The experiments weren't working. It would have been perfectly reasonable to stop, to rest, to try again tomorrow. But I knew something vital. Tomorrow's energy wouldn't magically solve today's problems. Let me give you a practical framework for pushing through fatigue. First, recognize the difference between discomfort and danger. Are you tired, or are you truly at risk? Most of what we call exhaustion is really just resistance. To discomfort, learn to distinguish between the voice of legitimate need and the voice of comfort-seeking. Second, break your work into smaller segments. When fatigue sets in, don't think about the whole project. Think about the next 10 minutes, the next experiment, the next attempt. Small steps are still steps forward, no matter how tired you are. Third, and this is crucial, maintain your standards even when tired. In my laboratory, we had a saying, "Fatigue is no excuse for sloppy work." If anything, being tired meant we needed to be more meticulous, more focused, more precise. Fourth, use your tired state as an advantage. When you're exhausted, you stop overthinking, you stop trying to be clever, you focus on the essentials. Some of our best solutions came when we were too tired to overcomplicate things. But here's where most people go wrong. They see rest as a requirement for progress. They believe they need to feel good to do good work. That's backwards. Some of your best work will happen when you feel your worst. Some of your biggest breakthroughs will come when you're running on empty. I've seen countless promising projects abandoned not because they failed, but because the person working on them got tired. They confused temporary fatigue with permanent defeat. They interpreted their exhaustion as a signal to quit rather than a challenge to overcome. Think about what you're working on right now. What if your fatigue isn't a sign to stop, but a sign that you're getting closer? What if your exhaustion isn't a limitation, but a threshold you need to push through? Remember this. History isn't made by people who only worked when they felt energized. It's made by people who showed up regardless of how they felt. The electric light wasn't created by someone who only worked when well-rested. The phonograph wasn't invented by someone who quit when tired. Your fatigue is not your enemy. It's your teacher. It shows you what you're willing to push through. It reveals your true priorities. When you're tired and you show up anyway, you prove to yourself what really matters. This isn't about ignoring your body's needs. It's about distinguishing between genuine limits and comfortable excuses. It's about understanding that sometimes the most important work happens when you least feel like doing it. So the next time fatigue whispers, stop. Ask yourself, is this a limit or is it a test? Is this the end of my capacity or is it the beginning of my breakthrough? Because often what feels like the end of your energy is really just the end of your comfort zone. Small steps, big results. Let me tell you about the day we created the first practical incandescent light bulb. Most people think it was a single moment of breakthrough, a flash of genius that changed the world. But the truth? It was the culmination of thousands of tiny steps, each one seemingly insignificant on its own. We tested 6,000 different plant materials for the filament. 6,000. Each test might have taken just minutes, but together they formed a methodical march toward success. Some days we'd test dozens of materials and learn nothing new. But each failure, each small step, each tiny data point brought us incrementally closer to the solution. You see, I discovered something crucial early in my career. Progress doesn't happen in leaps. It happens in inches. The distance between average and exceptional isn't a giant chasm. It's 1,000 tiny gaps, each one crossed through deliberate, consistent action. Here's what most people don't understand about achievement. They're waiting for the big moment, the dramatic breakthrough, the revolutionary insight. But real innovation, real progress, real mastery, it's built in the small moments, the quiet victories, the tiny improvements that no one else notices. I remember working on the phonograph's sound quality. We weren't trying to make it twice as good overnight. We were trying to make it 1% better each day, a slightly different groove depth here, a minor adjustment to the diaphragm there. Each change was almost imperceptible, but over time, these micro improvements transformed the entire technology. Let me give you a practical system for harnessing the power of small steps. First, break down your goal into the smallest possible units of progress. Don't think about creating a revolutionary invention. Think about testing one material. Don't think about building an empire. Think about making one sale. Don't think about writing a book. Think about writing one paragraph. Second, establish a minimum daily advancement. In my laboratory, we had a rule. Every experiment, no matter how small, had to teach us something new. Some days that lesson was tiny, barely worth noting, but it was progress. It was movement forward. Third, and this is crucial, document every small step. Keep a detailed record of your incremental progress, not just for accountability, but for perspective. When you can look back and see hundreds of small steps completed, it fuels your motivation to take the next one. Fourth, celebrate the microscopic victories. Most people wait for big achievements to feel satisfied. That's a recipe for frustration. Learn to find satisfaction in the small wins, the tiny improvements, the minor breakthroughs. They're the fuel that keeps you going. But here's where most people go wrong. They dismiss small actions as insignificant. They want to make dramatic changes, achieve instant results, see immediate transformation. They don't understand that monumental Achievements are built on mundane actions repeated consistently. I have seen brilliant minds fail, not because they lacked talent, but because they despised small steps. They wanted to skip the foundational work, the basic experiments, the simple tests. They wanted to jump straight to the breakthrough. But that's not how progress works. Think about what you're trying to achieve right now. How could you break it down into smaller steps? What's the tiniest action you could take today that would move you forward, even if just by an inch? Let me share something about the electric light system that few people know. Before we could light up cities, we had to figure out the smallest details: how to make switches that wouldn't spark, how to join wires properly, how to install fuses safely. These weren't glamorous problems. They weren't revolutionary challenges. But without solving these tiny issues, the bigger vision would have remained impossible. Remember this: every massive achievement in human history was built on countless small actions. The pyramids weren't built in great leaps. They were built one stone at a time. The greatest symphonies weren't composed in a flash of inspiration. They were crafted note by note. Your path to achievement isn't different. It's not about making huge leaps. It's about taking small steps consistently, persistently, relentlessly. It's about understanding that each tiny action, while insignificant on its own, becomes powerful when multiplied by time and persistence. The even gap between where you are and where you want to be isn't one giant leap. It's a series of small steps. And the beautiful thing about small steps is that you can always take one more, no matter how tired, no matter how discouraged, no matter how far you still have to go. So ask yourself, what's the smallest step you could take right now? What tiny action could you complete today? Because here's the truth: small steps, taken consistently, aren't just the path to achievement. They're the essence of achievement itself. What small step will you take today? Passion is overrated. Let me tell you about my least favorite day in the laboratory. It was a gray Tuesday in November, working on improving the storage battery. Nothing was working. Every experiment failed. The air was cold, my back ached, and I felt absolutely no passion for what I was doing. But you know what I did? I kept working, because I understood something crucial. Passion is a fickle friend, but routine is a loyal companion. You see, I've never trusted passion. Oh, I've felt it. Those electric moments of inspiration, those thrilling bursts of enthusiasm. But I learned early that you can't build an empire on feelings that come and go like the tide. You need something more reliable, more consistent, more permanent. Here's what most people don't understand about achievement. They're waiting for passion to drive them. They believe that successful people are constantly fueled by an intense love for their work. But let me tell you the truth. I spent countless hours doing things I didn't feel passionate about: checking calculations, running repetitive tests, filing patent applications. These tasks weren't exciting, but they were necessary. I remember one of my assistants quitting because he lost his passion for the work. The next day, we had our biggest breakthrough in months. He missed it not because he lacked ability, but because he trusted his feelings more than his routine. Let me share something about the invention of the light bulb that most people don't know. The most crucial experiments weren't the exciting ones. They were the monotonous ones. Testing filament after filament, documenting every minor variation, recording every small change. No passion there, just persistence, just routine. Here's what actually drives achievement: systems, habits, and routines. These aren't exciting words. They don't inspire poetry or stir the soul. But they build empires. They create lasting change. They transform ideas into reality. Let me give you a practical framework for building success without relying on passion. First, establish your non-negotiables. These are the actions you take regardless of how you feel. In my laboratory, we had certain procedures that happened every day, whether we felt inspired or not. Your emotions don't get a vote on your non-negotiables. Second, create environmental triggers. Your workspace should activate your routine, not your feelings. When I walked into my laboratory, it didn't matter if I felt passionate. The environment itself triggered my work response. The tools were there. The systems were there. The routine was there. Third, and this is crucial, focus on process, not emotion. Don't ask yourself how you feel about the work. Ask yourself what the work requires. Then do that, regardless of your emotional state. Fourth, build momentum through completion, not inspiration. Finish small tasks. Stack small victories. Let the satisfaction of completion, not the excitement of passion, fuel your progress. But here's where most people go wrong. They try to manufacture passion. They think if they're not feeling enthusiastic, something's wrong. They wait for motivation to strike, for inspiration to arrive, for passion to return. And while they're waiting, opportunities pass them by. I've seen countless brilliant minds fail, not because they lacked passion, but because they depended on it. They worked only when they felt inspired. They created only when they felt motivated. And as a result, their output was as inconsistent as their emotions. Think about what you're working on right now. What parts of it don't excite you? What aspects feel boring, tedious, or routine? Now, what if those very parts, the ones you're waiting to feel passionate about, are actually the key to your success? Remember this, the most successful people aren't the most passionate. They're the most persistent. They're the ones who show up when passion is nowhere to be found. They're the ones who have built systems strong enough to carry them through the emotional valleys. Your passion will fade. It's not a character flaw. It's human nature. The question isn't how to stay passionate. The question is, what systems will keep you moving forward when passion disappears? Because here's the truth about lasting achievement. It's built in the moments when you don't feel like building. It's created in the hours when creativity feels distant. It's achieved in the days when achievement feels impossible. Success isn't about finding your passion. It's about building systems that don't require passion. It's about creating routines that run on discipline, not desire. It's about showing up, not because you feel like it, but because that's what you do. So stop waiting for passion to motivate you. Stop expecting enthusiasm to drive you. Build systems, create routines, establish habits. These are the quiet engines of achievement, far more reliable than the loud but temporary voice of passion. What system will you build today? Show up in the dark. Let me tell you about the years before anyone knew my name. The years when I was just another telegraph operator with wild ideas. The years when I worked in basement workshops, train car laboratories, and cramped rented rooms. Those weren't the glamorous years. Those weren't the years that made headlines. But those were the years that made everything else possible. You see, I spent over a decade experimenting, failing, and learning before I created anything that caught the world's attention. Those were the dark years, the quiet years, the years when no one was watching, no one was cheering, and no one believed except me. Here's what most people don't understand about success. They see the light bulb moment, but they miss the 1,000 nights of darkness that came before it. They see the breakthrough, but they miss the breakdown. They see the triumph, but they miss the trial. I remember the nights in that baggage car on the Grand Trunk Railroad conducting experiments between stops. No audience, no recognition, no guarantee of success. Just a young man with borrowed equipment and ambitious dreams. Those moments in the dark, those were the moments that built the foundation for everything that followed. Let me share something about success that few people talk about. The most important work happens when no one's watching. The crucial experiments, the fundamental discoveries, the essential learning, it all happens in obscurity, in the dark. In the quiet hours when most people have gone home, think about the electric light for a moment. Everyone knows about the success, about the night it first illuminated Menlo Park, but do you know about the 3 years before that? The countless nights of failure, the endless experiments that yielded nothing but darkness? That's where the real work happened. Let me give you a framework for mastering these dark periods. First, embrace obscurity as an advantage. When no one's watching, you're free to fail, free to experiment, free to try radical approaches that might seem foolish. To others, use this freedom. In my early years, I could test wild ideas because no one was there to tell me they wouldn't work. Second, document your darkness. Keep detailed records of your journey through obscurity. Not just your successes, but your questions, your doubts, your failures. These records become invaluable later, but more importantly, they prove to yourself that you're making progress even when it feels like you're standing still. Third, and this is crucial, find satisfaction in the solitude of creation. Learn to love the quiet moments of progress that no one else sees, the small victories that you can't share yet, the tiny breakthroughs that only you understand. Fourth, use darkness as your teacher. In those quiet hours, without distraction, without audience, you can focus purely on the work. You can hear your own thoughts. You can follow your own instincts. But here's where most people go wrong. They wait to be discovered. They wait for recognition. They wait for validation. And in waiting, they miss the opportunity that darkness provides, the opportunity to build something truly substantial without the pressure of public attention. I've seen countless promising inventors fail, not because they lacked talent, but because they couldn't handle obscurity. They needed constant validation. They needed regular recognition. They needed others to see and appreciate their work. And because of that need, they never built anything worthy of being seen. Think about what you're building right now. What parts of your work happen in darkness? What progress are you making that no one else sees? What foundation are you laying in obscurity? Remember this, every significant achievement has its dark period. The novel that sits in drafts for years before publication. The business that struggles in anonymity before breaking through. The invention that exists only in late-night sketches before changing the world. Your dark period isn't a waiting room for success. It's the workshop where success is built. It's not a phase to endure. It's an opportunity to exploit. The quiet hours, the unseen effort, the solitary work, these aren't obstacles to your success. They're essential ingredients of it because here's the truth about breakthrough moments. They're not really moments at all. They're the visible tips of invisible icebergs. They're the public recognition of private dedication. They're the world finally seeing what you've been building in the dark. So embrace these dark hours. Welcome the obscurity. Understand that right now, in the quiet, in the dark, you're building something substantial, something real, something that will eventually emerge into the light. What will you build in the dark today? Repeat until something breaks. Let me tell you about the day we finally broke through with the phonograph's sound quality. We had been repeating the same experiment with minute variations for weeks, the same motion, the same process, the same test, over and over and over again. My assistants thought I had lost my mind. "Mr. Edison," they said, "we're just doing the same thing repeatedly." I smiled and replied, "No, we're doing the same thing better repeatedly." You see, I discovered something crucial about breakthrough achievements. They rarely come from radical changes. They come from relentless repetition pushed to its absolute limit. They come from doing the same thing again and again until something finally breaks, either the problem or your previous understanding of it. Here's what most people don't understand about repetition. They see it as mindless. They think it's about going through the motions. But true repetition, the kind that leads to breakthroughs, is about going deeper with each iteration. It's about finding the microscopic spaces where improvement hides. I remember working on the telegraph repeater. For days, we repeated the same sequence of tests. Each time, we adjusted something tiny. The tension of a spring, the distance of a contact, the timing of a mechanism. To an outsider, it looked like we were stuck in a loop. But each repetition was teaching us something new, showing us something we had missed before. Let me share something about the light bulb that most people don't know. It wasn't the 1,000th different experiment that worked. It was the 1,000th. Repetition of a similar experiment with tiny, crucial variations. We weren't trying 1,000 completely different things. We were trying the same basic thing 1,000 different ways. Here's a practical system for mastering the power of repetition. First, identify your core process. What's the fundamental action that, if mastered, would transform your results? In my work, with the light bulb, it was the creation and testing of filaments. Everything else was secondary. Second, establish your baseline repetition. How many times can you repeat this process in a given time period? Don't worry about perfection yet. Just establish the rhythm. In my laboratory, we started with 20 experimental iterations per day. Third, and this is crucial, introduce systematic variation. Don't just repeat blindly. Change one variable at a time. Document the results. Learn from each iteration. This is where mindless repetition becomes meaningful experimentation. Fourth, push until something breaks. Either the problem will break, revealing its solution, or your understanding will break, revealing a new approach. Either way, breakthrough lives on the other side of this breaking point. But here's where most people go wrong. They quit too soon. They mistake temporary frustration for permanent failure. They see repetition as a sign that they're stuck, rather than a sign that they're drilling deeper into possibility. I've seen brilliant minds fail not because they lacked creativity, but because they lacked the patience for repetition. They wanted each attempt to be different, each try to be novel. They didn't understand that mastery lives in the minutiae of repetition. Think about what you're working on right now. What if the breakthrough you're seeking isn't in doing something different, but in doing the same thing with deeper understanding? What if the answer isn't in variety, but in variation? Remember this: every master craftsman, every elite athlete, every great artist understands the power of repetition. They don't just practice until they get it right. They practice until they can't get it wrong. They don't just repeat until they succeed. They repeat until something breaks through to a new level of understanding. The phonograph wasn't invented through sporadic brilliance. It was born from thousands of repetitions, each one slightly different, each one teaching us something new. The electric light wasn't created through random attempts. It emerged from systematic, relentless repetition, pushed to its breaking point. Because here's the truth about breakthrough achievement. It's not about having 1,000 different ideas. It's about exploring one idea 1,000 different ways. It's not about trying everything once. It's about trying the right thing relentlessly until either the problem breaks or your understanding of it transforms. Your breakthrough is waiting on the other side of repetition. Not mindless repetition, but mindful, systematic, relentless repetition. The kind that breaks through barriers, the kind that shatters limitations, the kind that transforms understanding. So ask yourself, what will you repeat today? What process? Will you push to its breaking point? What action will you perform, not just until it works, but until it reveals something new? Because in that space, between mechanical repetition and breakthrough understanding, that's where innovation lives. What will you repeat until something breaks? Mastery is monotony. Let me tell you about the most boring day in my laboratory. The day we made our biggest breakthrough on the storage battery. Hour after hour, we performed the same tests, recorded the same measurements, made the same minute adjustments. No excitement, no drama, just endless, meticulous repetition. That monotonous day, that seemingly endless loop of tedium, led to a patent that transformed the world. You see, I've discovered something about mastery that most people don't want to hear. It's built on boredom, not excitement, not inspiration, not those rare moments of brilliant insight. It's built on showing up day after day and embracing the monotony of meticulous work. Here's what most people don't understand about achieving world-class results. They're waiting for the exciting parts. They want the eureka moments, the breakthrough, discoveries, the revolutionary insights. But true mastery lives in the mundane. It's forged in the crucible of repetition, in the endless hours of doing the same thing over and over again. I remember training new assistants in my laboratory. The Eager ones always wanted to skip to the exciting experiments, but I would assign them the most monotonous tasks first: measuring wire resistance, cataloging materials, documenting test results. Those who embraced the monotony became invaluable. Those who craved constant excitement never lasted. Let me share something about invention that most people don't realize: it's 99% monotonous work. The light bulb wasn't created in a flash of inspiration. It was born from thousands of hours of tedious experimentation, meticulous documentation, and endless refinement. Here's a practical framework for embracing the monotony of mastery. First, identify your fundamental tasks. What are the basic, repetitive actions that form the foundation of your work? In my laboratory, it was measurement, documentation, and systematic testing. These weren't exciting, but they were essential. Second, create a ritual around monotony. Don't fight the boredom. Embrace it. Make it sacred. Turn repetition into ritual. When we were testing filaments, I didn't see it as tedious work. I saw it as a ceremony of discovery. Third, and this is crucial, find depth in repetition. Each time you perform a task, look for new layers of understanding. The surface may be monotonous, but beneath it lies infinite complexity. Every time we tested a filament, we noticed something new, something deeper. Fourth, measure everything. Monotony without measurement is just motion. But when you measure, document, and analyze, even the most repetitive task becomes a source of insight. But here's where most people go wrong. They try to make everything exciting. They avoid monotony at all costs. They jump from task to task, seeking variety, craving novelty. And in doing so, they never develop the depth that only comes from embracing the boring parts of mastery. I have seen brilliant minds fail, not because they lacked talent, but because they couldn't handle monotony. They needed constant stimulation, constant variation, constant excitement. They never understood that mastery lives in the spaces between excitement, in the quiet, repetitive moments that most people avoid. Think about what you're working on right now. What parts of it do you find boring? What aspects do you try to avoid because they seem monotonous? What if those very elements, the ones you're trying to skip, are actually the key to your mastery? Remember this: every master in history embraced monotony. The greatest artists spent countless hours mixing colors and practicing basic strokes. The greatest musicians played scales for decades. The greatest athletes repeated the same movements millions of times. The storage battery wasn't created through excitement. It was born from monotony, from thousands of hours of repetitive tests, meticulous measurements, and careful documentation. The phonograph wasn't invented through constant variety. It emerged from endless repetition, from embracing the boring parts of experimentation. Because here's the truth about world-class achievement. It's not built on excitement. It's built on embracing monotony. It's not created through constant variety. It's forged through relentless repetition. It's not found in avoiding the boring parts. It's discovered by diving deeper into them. Your mastery is waiting on the other side of monotony, not by avoiding it, but by embracing it, not by fighting it, but by finding depth within it, not by making it exciting, but by understanding that its very monotony is what makes it powerful. So ask yourself, what monotonous task will you embrace today? What boring but essential work will you dive into? What repetitive action will you transform into a ritual of mastery? Because in those quiet, monotonous moments, that's where greatness is built. What monotony will you master today? The 1,000-day rule, let me tell you about December 31st, 1879, the day we first demonstrated the electric light to the public. The newspapers called it an overnight success. They said I had suddenly solved the puzzle of incandescent lighting. What they didn't mention were the previous 1,000 days. The 3 years of constant experimentation, relentless failure, and systematic learning that preceded that single moment of triumph. You see, I've discovered something about significant achievements. They all have a gestation period, a minimum. Time requirement that can't be shortened, can't be rushed, can't be hacked. I call it the 1,000-day rule. Give any worthwhile endeavor 1,000 days of focused, systematic effort before you judge its potential. Here's what most people don't understand about long-term achievement. They overestimate what they can accomplish in a month and drastically underestimate what they can achieve in 3 years. They plant seeds today and dig them up tomorrow to check if they're growing. I remember the early days of working on the phonograph. After 30 days, we had nothing but failed experiments and broken equipment. After 90 days, we had only frustration and mounting debts. But after 1,000 days, we had revolutionized the way humans experience sound. Let me share something about the storage battery that few people know. It took over 10,000 experiments to develop. But here's the crucial part. The first 1,000 days weren't about success. They were about eliminating what wouldn't work. They were about building the foundation of understanding that would eventually lead to breakthrough. Here's a practical framework for applying the 1,000-day rule. First, make an unbreakable commitment. Don't give yourself an escape clause. When we started working on the electric light, I didn't say, "I'll try for a while." I committed to solving the problem no matter how long it took. Second, break the 1,000 days into measurable phases. The first 100 days are for foundational learning, the next 200 for systematic experimentation, the following 300 for refinement and optimization, the final 400 for mastery and innovation. Third, and this is crucial, document everything. Create a record of your 1,000-day journey. Not just your successes, but your questions, your failures, your insights. This isn't just for posterity. It's for perspective when you're deep in the middle phase. Fourth, establish daily minimum standards. What's the smallest meaningful action you can take each day? In my laboratory, it was conducting at least one new experiment, no matter how simple. Small actions multiplied by 1,000 days create unstoppable momentum. But here's where most people go wrong. They make judgments too early. They evaluate results before the foundation is even built. They quit at day 30, day 90, day 180, never knowing that breakthrough was waiting at day 800. I've seen brilliant minds fail not because they lacked ability, but because they lacked patience. They wanted to succeed on their schedule, not on reality's schedule. They never understood that some achievements simply require time, not just for skill development, but for compound effects to accumulate. Think about what you're working on right now. What if you removed all pressure to succeed quickly? What if you gave yourself permission to spend 1,000 days mastering this one thing? What would change about your approach? Remember this, every significant achievement in history required time. The pyramids weren't built in a year. Language wasn't developed in a month. Art wasn't mastered in a week. These achievements required generations of sustained effort. The electric light system wasn't created in a burst of inspiration. It was built day by day, experiment by experiment, failure by failure, over thousands of days of sustained effort. The phonograph wasn't invented in a flash of genius. It emerged through systematic experimentation, persistent refinement, and relentless iteration over years, not weeks. Because here's the truth about lasting achievement. It's not about intensity. It's about consistency over time. It's not about working harder for a month. It's about working systematically for 1,000 days. It's not about finding shortcuts. It's about embracing the long path. Your breakthrough is waiting. Not at day 30, not at day 90, but somewhere in those 1,000 days of focused, systematic effort. The question isn't whether you can achieve something remarkable. The question is, can you give yourself permission to take the time required? So ask yourself, what will you commit to for the next 1,000 days? What seed will you plant today and nurture for 3 years? What dream deserves your extended, systematic attention? Because in those 1,000 days, that's where lasting achievement lives. What will you master in your next 1,000 days? Ship imperfect work. Let me tell you about the first phonograph we ever demonstrated to the public. The sound quality was terrible. The volume was weak. The reproduction was scratchy and distorted. But we showed it anyway. Why? Because I understood something crucial about progress. Perfection is the enemy of innovation. You see, I've learned that the most dangerous thing you can do with your work is wait until it's perfect. The first electric light was crude compared to what came later. The first motion picture was rough and grainy. The first storage battery was inefficient. But we shipped them all, and in doing so, we learned more in a week of real-world use than we could have learned in a year of laboratory perfection. Here is what most people don't understand about innovation. They think it's about getting everything right before showing it to the world. But real innovation happens in the space between shipping and feedback. It lives in the gap between what you've created and what the world tells you it needs. I remember one of my assistants who kept refining a telegraph improvement. Week after week, he adjusted and tweaked, always saying, "It's not quite ready." Finally, I took his imperfect prototype and demonstrated it to the telegraph company. They bought it immediately, and their feedback led to improvements we hadn't even considered. Let me share something about the light bulb that most don't know. We started selling them before we had fully solved the filament durability problem. Was this risky? Perhaps. But those early sales, those real-world installations, taught us more about what needed improvement than any laboratory test could have. Here's a practical framework for shipping imperfect work. First, define your minimum viable version. What's the simplest version of your idea that could provide value? When we developed the phonograph, we started with just voice reproduction. Music came later. Complex recordings came much later. Second, establish clear improvement cycles. Don't think about perfection. Think about iterations. Each version doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be better than the last. Our first light bulbs lasted hours, then days, then weeks. Each iteration shipped, each iteration improved. Third, and this is crucial, build feedback loops into your process. Every time you ship something imperfect, create systems to learn from its real-world performance. We had teams dedicated to gathering data from every light bulb installation, every phonograph sale, every battery deployment. Fourth, maintain momentum through shipping. The act of releasing your work creates energy, creates motivation, creates momentum. When you wait for perfection, you stagnate. When you ship regularly, you accelerate. But here's where most people go wrong. They confuse perfectionism with quality. They think that by holding onto their work longer, by refining it endlessly, they're ensuring its success. In reality, they're ensuring its irrelevance. I've seen brilliant minds fail not because their work wasn't good enough, but because they never let it leave their workshop. They were so afraid of criticism, so worried about imperfection, that their innovations never saw the light of day. Think about what you're working on right now. What if you shipped it today in its imperfect state? What if you let the world see it, use it, critique it? What could you learn from that exposure that you'll never learn in isolation? Remember this: every great innovation in history started as an imperfect version of itself. The first automobiles were unreliable. The first telephones were barely audible. The first airplanes barely flew. But their creators shipped them anyway, and in doing so, they started the cycle of improvement that led to greatness. The electric light system wasn't perfect when we first installed it. The phonograph wasn't perfect when we first demonstrated it. The motion picture camera wasn't perfect when we first used it. But by shipping these imperfect versions, we started conversations, gathered feedback, and learned lessons that would have been impossible otherwise. Because here's the truth. About innovation, it's not about reaching perfection. It's about starting conversations. It's not about getting everything right. It's about getting something useful into the world. It's not about avoiding criticism. It's about learning from real-world use. Your work will never be perfect, but it can be valuable, it can be useful, it can be important, even in its imperfect state. The question isn't whether it's flawless. The question is, can it help someone today? So ask yourself, what imperfect work are you holding on to? What project are you endlessly refining? What innovation are you keeping hidden until it's ready? Because in that gap between shipping and perfection, that's where real progress lives. What will you ship today? The cost of inconsistency. Let me tell you about the most expensive mistake I ever made in my laboratory. It wasn't a failed experiment. It wasn't a broken piece of equipment. It wasn't even a rejected patent. It was a gap in our testing schedule, a single week when we deviated from our consistent experimental routine. That one break in consistency set our electric light research back by 3 months. You see, I've learned something crucial about progress. Inconsistency isn't neutral. It's destructive. When you skip a day, you don't just lose that day's progress. You create ripples of inefficiency that spread forward and backward through time. Here's what most people don't understand about consistency. They think missing a day here or there is harmless. They believe they can make up for gaps with increased intensity later. But that's not how progress works. That's not how mastery develops. That's not how breakthroughs happen. I remember watching a promising assistant's work deteriorate. Over time, he would work intensely for days, then disappear for a week, return with renewed enthusiasm, then fade away again. Each gap in his consistency didn't just pause his progress, it erased portions of what he'd already learned. Let me share something about the phonograph's development that few people know. We had the basic principle working within weeks, but it took months to make it reliable. Why? Because every time we interrupted our consistent testing schedule, we lost the subtle understanding, the tacit knowledge that only comes from daily engagement. Here's a practical framework for understanding and avoiding the cost of inconsistency. First, calculate the real cost of gaps. When you skip a day, you don't just lose that day's progress. You lose momentum. You lose subtle insights. You lose the compound effect of consecutive effort. In my laboratory, we found that a one-day gap often required 3 days to regain full momentum. Second, identify your consistency threshold. What's the minimum frequency you need to maintain progress? In our electric light experiments, we discovered that anything less than 6 days per week caused significant setbacks. Your work might have different requirements, but you need to know what they are. Third, and this is crucial, build buffers into your consistency. Don't aim for the minimum, aim for sustainability. If you need 6 days of work per week, plan for 7. Give yourself room for genuine emergencies without breaking your consistent rhythm. Fourth, measure the decay rate of your progress. How quickly do your skills or insights deteriorate when you're inconsistent? In detailed work like ours, we found that precision skills began to decay after just 2 days of inactivity. But here's where most people go wrong. They underestimate the compound cost of inconsistency. They see only the immediate impact of a missed day, not the ripple effects that spread through weeks and months of work. I've seen brilliant minds fail, not because they lacked ability, but because they couldn't maintain consistency. They worked in bursts and gaps, never understanding that their inconsistency was actively destroying their progress. Think about what you're working on right now. What has inconsistency already cost you? How many insights have slipped away during gaps? How much momentum have you lost to irregular effort? Remember this: every significant achievement in history was built on consistency. The pyramids weren't built in bursts of random activity. The great cathedrals weren't constructed on an irregular schedule. These wonders required relentless, consistent effort. The electric light system wasn't created through sporadic work. Each gap in our consistency didn't just pause progress. It erased vital understanding that had to be rebuilt. The phonograph wasn't perfected through irregular experimentation. Each break in our testing rhythm didn't just delay success, it actively moved us backward. Because here's the truth about achievement. Consistency isn't just about maintaining progress. It's about preventing decay. It's not just about moving forward. It's about not sliding backward. It's not just about building momentum. It's about preventing the costly destruction of what you've already built. Your progress is more fragile than you think. Your insights are more perishable than you realize. Your momentum is more valuable than you know. And each break in consistency isn't just a pause, it's an active force of destruction. So ask yourself, what has inconsistency already cost you? What progress have you lost to irregular effort? What momentum have you sacrificed to sporadic work? Because in the gap between consistent and inconsistent effort, that's where potential dies. What will you protect with consistency today? Obsession builds empires. Let me tell you about the time my wife found me at 3 a.m, still in my laboratory, covered in carbon dust and metallic filings. She said I was obsessed. She was right. That obsession was perfecting the carbon microphone, which would later revolutionize long-distance communication. What others called madness, I knew was the price of transformation. You see, I've learned something about breakthrough achievement that polite society doesn't want to hear. It requires obsession, not dedication, not hard work, not even passion. Pure, unreasonable, all-consuming obsession. The kind that makes people question your sanity. Here's what most people don't understand about world-changing achievement. They think it comes from balanced effort, from reasonable dedication, from healthy work habits. But history tells a different story. Every empire, every revolution, every transformation was built by someone who crossed the line between dedication and obsession. I remember when I first started working on the electric light system, people said I was obsessed, that I needed to diversify my interests, that I was too focused on one problem. They didn't understand that obsession isn't a choice. It's a requirement for anyone who wants to change the world. Let me share something about invention that most people don't realize. The biggest breakthroughs don't come from balanced minds. They come from obsessed minds, minds that can't let go, can't step away, can't think about anything else until the problem is solved. Here's a practical framework for harnessing the power of obsession. First, identify your consuming problem. What question keeps you awake? What challenge haunts your thoughts? What possibility won't let you rest? For me, it was the question of electric light. Find yours and let it consume you. Second, eliminate everything that doesn't serve your obsession. When we were developing the light bulb, I sold or shelved other patents, declined social invitations, simplified my life to create space for my obsession to grow. Obsession requires sacrifice. Third, and this is crucial, build systems that protect and fuel your obsession. My laboratory was designed to allow me to work for days without leaving. My assistants were chosen for their ability to match my obsessive focus. Everything in my environment was arranged to serve the obsession. Fourth, embrace the social cost. Accept that others won't understand. They'll call you crazy, unreasonable, unbalanced. Let them. Their balanced lives will never create anything revolutionary. But here's where most people go wrong. They try to moderate their obsession. They try to maintain what society calls balance. They try to stay within the bounds of reasonable effort. And in doing so, they kill the very force that could have transformed their work from good to revolutionary. I've seen brilliant minds fail not because they lacked talent, but because they feared their own obsession. They pulled back when they should have pushed deeper. They sought balance when they should have embraced extremity. Think about what you're working on right now. What if you let it consume you completely? What if you stopped trying to maintain balance and instead surrendered to pure obsession? What could you achieve if you crossed that line? Remember this, every significant achievement in history was created by someone who was labeled obsessed. The Wright brothers were called monomaniacal about flight. Tesla was considered mad about electricity. These weren't insults. They were accurate descriptions of the force required to change the world. The electric light system wasn't created through balanced effort. It was built through obsession, through endless hours, through missed meals, through sleepless nights, through what others called madness. The phonograph wasn't invented by someone with diverse interests. It was created by someone who couldn't think about anything else until the problem was solved. Because here's the truth about revolutionary achievement. It doesn't come from balanced effort. It comes from obsession. It doesn't come from reasonable dedication. It comes from unreasonable focus. It doesn't come from maintaining social norms. It comes from violating them in pursuit of something bigger. Your obsession isn't your enemy. It's your greatest asset. Your single-minded focus isn't a flaw. It's your superpower. Your inability to let go of a problem isn't a weakness. It's the force that will drive you to breakthrough. So ask yourself, what would happen if you stopped apologizing for your obsession? What could you achieve if you let that consuming fire burn at full intensity? What might you create if you crossed the line between dedication and madness? Because in that space, between reasonable effort and unreasonable obsession, that's where empires are built. That's where revolutions are born. That's where the world changes. What will you become obsessed with today? Do the work no one sees. Let me tell you about the years I spent studying chemistry before I ever touched an electrical experiment. No one saw those hours. No one celebrated that learning. No one knew about the thousands of pages of notes I took, studying the properties of materials that would later become crucial to my inventions. That invisible preparation laid the foundation for everything that followed. You see, I've discovered something about extraordinary achievement that most people miss. The most important work happens when no one's watching. The crucial preparations, the fundamental research, the basic experiments, they all happen in complete obscurity. Here's what most people don't understand about success. They focus on the visible moments, the public triumphs, the celebrated breakthroughs. But these are just the tip of the iceberg. The real work, the work that matters most, happens beneath the surface, unseen and unrecognized. I remember spending months just studying different types of bamboo for light bulb filaments. No headlines there, no public interest, no recognition. Just quiet, methodical research that proved essential to our eventual success. My competitors were hosting grand demonstrations while we were cataloging plant fibers. Let me share something about the motion picture camera that few people know. Before we built a single prototype, I spent 6 months studying the mechanics of human vision. Not exciting work, not work anyone cared about. But that invisible foundation made everything else possible. Here's a practical framework for mastering invisible work. First, identify your fundamental knowledge gaps. What basic understanding are you missing? What foundation needs strengthening? When we started working on sound recording, I first had to study the physics of sound itself, work no one would ever see or celebrate. Second, create systems for invisible progress. Keep detailed records of your unseen work. Document your learning, your experiments, your failures. In my laboratory, we filled thousands of pages with notes that no one but us would ever read. Third, and this is crucial, find satisfaction in private progress. Learn to celebrate the small victories that no one else understands. When we finally understood why certain filaments failed, it was a huge breakthrough. But try explaining that excitement to someone outside the laboratory. Fourth, build your work from the bottom up. Don't skip the invisible foundations in pursuit of visible results. I spent years developing my understanding of electrical principles before attempting any major inventions. But here's where most people go wrong. They focus on the visible outcomes, while neglecting the invisible processes. They want the acclaim without the preparation. They want the breakthrough without the groundwork. I've seen brilliant minds fail not because they lacked ability, but because they only wanted to do the visible work. They wanted to skip the quiet preparation, the invisible foundation laying, the unsexy basics that make everything else possible. Think about what you're working on right now. What invisible work are you avoiding? What fundamental preparation are you skipping? What basic knowledge are you neglecting because no one will see you acquire it? Remember this: every significant achievement in history was built on a mountain of invisible work. The great cathedrals required years of unseen mathematical calculations. The masterpieces of art demanded countless hours of private practice. The revolutionary theories emerged from decades of quiet study. The electric light system wasn't just about the visible moment when the bulb first illuminated. It was built on years of invisible work, studying materials, understanding electricity, developing manufacturing processes that no one would ever see or appreciate. Because here's the truth about lasting achievement. It's built in private before it's ever revealed in public. It's constructed in obscurity before it's unveiled in the spotlight. It's created in silence before it ever makes a sound. Your most important work won't be seen. Your most crucial progress won't be recognized. Your most valuable efforts won't be applauded. And that's exactly as it should be. The work that no one sees is the work that everyone eventually benefits from. The private preparations you make today become the public breakthroughs of tomorrow. The invisible foundations you lay now support the visible achievements yet to come. So, ask yourself, what invisible work are you willing to do? What private progress are you ready to make? What unseen preparation will you commit to today? Because in that space between what's visible and what's vital, that's where excellence is built. What invisible work will you master today? The clock is lying to you. Let me tell you about the day I realized time was a liar. I was working on the telegraph repeater and someone said, "Mr. Edison, it's impossible to solve this in the time we have." I looked at them and said, "Time doesn't decide what's possible. Action does." That day we worked for 23 straight hours and solved a problem that was supposed to take weeks. You see, I've discovered something about time that most people never realize. The clock is the greatest liar in human history. It tells you there are limits, boundaries, fixed constraints. But I've learned that time bends to the will of those who refuse to accept its apparent limitations. Here's what most people don't understand about time. They think it's fixed, unchangeable, absolute. They believe the clock's story about how long things should take, about what's possible in a day, about the limits of human achievement. But time is more flexible than they imagine. I remember when we were developing the phonograph. The experts said it would take years to create a working prototype. Their calculations were precise. Their timelines were realistic. Their estimates were professional. We did it in months, not because we had more time, but because we refused to believe time's lies. Let me share something about the light bulb that most don't know. The experts had calculated it would take at least a decade to develop a practical incandescent light. Their math was perfect. Their logic was sound. And they were completely wrong because they were measuring time instead of possibility. Here's a practical framework for mastering time instead of being mastered by it. First, recognize that time is subjective. An hour of focused work can accomplish more than a week of scattered effort. When we were developing the stock ticker, we achieved in one concentrated day what others couldn't do in a month of normal work. Second, stop accepting conventional timeframes. When someone tells you how long something should take, understand that they're describing limits of belief, not limits of possibility. We built our first phonograph prototype in a fraction of the required time because we never accepted the standard timeline. Third, and this is crucial, learn to compress time through intensity. Time doesn't determine output. Intensity does. In my laboratory, we discovered that 3 hours of absolute focus could accomplish more than 3 days of routine effort. Fourth, master the art of time manipulation, stack activities, parallel, process. Find ways to accomplish multiple objectives simultaneously. When we were developing the electric light, we designed our experiments so that each test would answer multiple questions at once. But here's where most people go wrong. They surrender to time's apparent authority. They accept conventional time frames as absolute. They believe the clock's lies about what's possible in a day, a week, a month. I've seen brilliant minds fail, not because they lacked ability, but because they became slaves to time. They let the clock dictate their possibilities instead of letting their possibilities dictate their use of time. Think about what you're working on right now. What time frames have you accepted without question? What schedules have you embraced without challenge? What deadlines have you allowed to limit your possibilities? Remember this: every revolutionary achievement in history happened faster than the experts said was possible. The airplane wasn't supposed to be invented for decades after it was. The telephone wasn't supposed to be practical for another generation. These achievements didn't respect time's supposed limits. The electric light system wasn't built according to conventional time frames. We compressed decades of expected development into years, years into months, months into weeks. Not by having more time, but by refusing to let time define our possibilities. Because here's the truth about achievement: time doesn't determine what's possible. Action does. The clock doesn't control your progress. Intensity does. The calendar doesn't limit your achievements. Belief does. Your relationship with time is a choice. You can be its servant, bound by its apparent limits, confined by its supposed boundaries. Or you can be its master, bending it to your will, compressing it through intensity, expanding it through focus. The clock will tell you there's not enough time. It will insist that you need more hours, more days, more years. It will present its case with perfect logic and precise measurements, and it will be lying to you. So ask yourself, what could you achieve if you stopped believing time's lies? What would be possible if you refused to accept conventional time frames? What could you create if you became time's master instead of its servant? Because in that space, between time's lies and your truth, that's where the impossible becomes achievable. That's where limitations dissolve. That's where history is made. What lie will you stop believing today? Discomfort is your daily friend. Let me tell you about the most valuable lesson I learned in my laboratory. The more uncomfortable the work, the more important it usually was. The days when my back ached from bending over experiments, when my eyes burned from hours of detailed observation, when my mind recoiled from yet another failure, those were the days that preceded every major breakthrough. You see, I've discovered something about extraordinary achievement that most people actively avoid. Discomfort isn't just an occasional visitor on the path to success. It's your constant companion, your daily friend, your most reliable indicator that you're moving in the right direction. Here's what most people don't understand about progress. They're waiting for it to feel good. They're waiting for the moment when the work becomes easy, when the resistance fades, when the path smooths out. But that moment never comes, not for anything worth achieving. I remember the development of the storage battery, 10 years of constant discomfort, physical discomfort from handling caustic materials, mental discomfort from repeated failures, emotional discomfort from public skepticism. Every day brought new forms of discomfort, and every bit of that discomfort was telling us we were pushing boundaries that needed to be pushed. Let me share something about invention that most don't. Realize, comfort is the enemy of discovery. Every significant breakthrough I ever made came through embracing discomfort, not avoiding it. The light bulb, the phonograph, the motion picture camera, each one was born from thousands of uncomfortable hours. Here's a practical framework for making discomfort your ally. First, recognize that discomfort is information. When you feel resistance, when you want to quit, when your mind begs for an easier path, that's not a warning sign. It's a signal that you're pushing into valuable territory. In my laboratory, we learned to read discomfort like a compass pointing toward breakthrough. Second, actively seek daily discomfort. Don't wait for it to find you. Chase it. When we were developing the electric light, I deliberately took on the most uncomfortable tasks each day, not because I enjoyed them, but because I knew that's where the crucial discoveries lived. Third, and this is crucial, learn to calibrate different types of discomfort: physical fatigue, mental strain, emotional resistance. Each has its own message. Learn to distinguish between the discomfort of progress and the discomfort of damage. One you embrace, the other you respect. Fourth, build your discomfort tolerance systematically. Start each day with something uncomfortable. End each day with something challenging. Treat your capacity for discomfort like a muscle that needs regular exercise. But here's where most people go wrong. They treat discomfort as a problem to be solved. They think if they're uncomfortable, something's wrong. They never realize that discomfort is the price of admission for any significant achievement. I've seen brilliant minds fail not because they lacked talent, but because they couldn't embrace discomfort. They wanted the breakthrough without the breakdown. They wanted the discovery without the distress. They wanted the achievement without the adversity. Think about what you're working on right now. What aspects of it make you uncomfortable? What parts do you avoid because they're difficult, unpleasant, or challenging? What if those very elements, the ones that make you most uncomfortable, are actually the ones that hold the key to your next breakthrough? Remember this: every significant achievement in history was created through discomfort. The great explorations, the revolutionary inventions, the transformative discoveries, all were born through embracing daily discomfort. The electric light wasn't created in comfort. Every day brought new challenges, new resistances, new reasons to quit. The phonograph wasn't developed in ease. Each step forward required pushing through physical, mental, and emotional barriers that begged for relief. Because here's the truth. About meaningful achievement, comfort is the cage that keeps possibility captive. The easier path leads to ordinary results. The comfortable choice produces predictable outcomes. The path of least resistance leads exactly where everyone else has already been. Your discomfort is not your enemy. It's your guide. Your resistance is not your opponent. It's your teacher. Your challenges are not your obstacles. They're your opportunities. The more uncomfortable your daily routine, the more likely you are to create something extraordinary. The more resistance you feel, the more important the work probably is. The more you want to avoid something, the more likely it is to contain the seeds of breakthrough. So ask yourself, what discomfort are you avoiding right now? What resistance are you trying to eliminate? What challenges are you attempting to circumvent? Because in that space, between comfort and capability, that's where extraordinary achievement lives. What uncomfortable truth will you embrace today? Show up until the door opens. Let me tell you about the 10,000th time we tested a filament for the electric light. Most people would have quit at 100 attempts. Any reasonable person would have given up at 1,000. But we kept showing up, kept testing, kept pushing forward. Not because we were special, not because we were smarter, but because we understood something crucial. Persistence isn't about talent. It's about outlasting everyone else. You see, I've discovered something about breakthrough achievement that most people never realize. Success isn't about finding the right door. It's about knocking on the same door until it opens. Most people knock once, maybe twice, then move on to another door. They never discover that the door they left might have opened on the 1,000th knock. Here's what most people don't understand about persistence. They think it's about motivation, about drive, about passion. But real persistence is simpler and harder than that. It's about showing up again and again and again, especially when every rational voice tells you to quit. I remember the days before the phonograph worked. Every expert said it was impossible. Every test failed. Every attempt produced nothing but scratchy noise. But we kept showing up, not because we were confident, not because we knew it would work, but because showing up was the only variable we could control. Let me share something about invention that most don't realize. Breakthrough isn't an event. It's an inevitability for those who refuse to stop. The light bulb wasn't created by genius. It was created by persistence, by showing up day after day until the door of possibility finally opened. Here's a practical framework for mastering the art of showing up. First, understand that persistence is mathematical. Every time you show up, you increase the probability of breakthrough. In my laboratory, we didn't think in terms of success or failure. We thought in terms of attempts. Each attempt moved us mathematically closer to solution. Second, remove all exit strategies. Don't give yourself backup plans. Don't create escape routes. When we were developing the storage battery, I sold other patents to fund the research. I burned the boats. I left myself no choice but to persist. Third, and this is crucial, separate showing up from results. Your only job is to keep knocking. The door's job is to open. Don't confuse the two. Too many people quit because they take responsibility for the wrong part of the equation. Fourth, understand that persistence compounds. Each time you show up, you build more than just experience. You build the habit of persistence itself. This habit becomes your most valuable asset. But here's where most people go wrong. They try to calculate their odds of success. They try to figure out if it's worth it to continue. They never realize that persistence isn't about odds. It's about outlasting the odds. I've seen brilliant minds fail not because they lacked ability, but because they quit too soon. They had the talent, the ideas, the potential, but they lacked the simple, brutal willingness to keep showing up until the door opened. Think about what you're working on right now. How many times have you knocked? How many times have you shown up? What if breakthrough is just on the other side of the attempt you're thinking of abandoning? Remember this. Every significant achievement in history was created by someone who stayed too long, knocked too many times, showed up after everyone else had gone home. The Wright brothers didn't take flight on their first attempt. Pasteur didn't cure disease in his first experiment. These achievements weren't created by genius. They were created by persistence. The electric light system wasn't built by someone who knew how to do it. It was built by someone who kept showing up until he figured it out. The phonograph wasn't created by someone who had the answers. It was created by someone who kept asking questions until the answers emerged. Because here's the truth about lasting achievement: the door will open. Not because you're special, not because you're gifted, not because you're destined, but because you're still there, still knocking, still showing up long after everyone else has gone home. Your persistence is your power. Your consistency is your genius. Your willingness to keep showing up is your superpower. The door will open, not because of who you are, but because of how long you're willing to stand there knocking. So ask yourself, are you willing to be the last one standing? Are you willing to keep showing up when everyone else has quit? Are you willing to persist beyond reason, beyond logic, beyond what seems possible? Because in that space, between ordinary persistence and extraordinary commitment, that's where history is made. That's where breakthrough lives. That's where the door finally opens. What door will you keep knocking on today?